Yeah, and she recognises that. She recognises that.
How are we doing? Should we come back together? You okay?
Yeah.
Great. Should we just share a few of the things? Because I'm sure people involved in loads of different stuff said some really interesting stuff. Should people want to share some of the things? What are the kind of examples of, we're going to sort of anchor sin, as it were, in stuff that we see and what we see around us? Where would we locate it?
I work in mental health, and I think a lot of the people I work with have had a lot of sin done to them at an early age. Thus, they have no model of how to be a compassionate, kind, grounded human being. They've not seen that, so they perpetuate really difficult behaviour because that's all they know. And also they've got no sense of who they are as a person, or a very damaged sense of who they are as a person, so they just can't function, and then you just see them doing the same to their kids, and it's a bit cyclical, but it's, just rooted in a lot of, like, if all you see is brokenness, sometimes that's all you can kind of give out.
So it makes sense of the sort of original sin, I think, things like this generational ideas, because they're handed on, and those chains of, we were talking about those chains of positivity, because obviously so many people are victims of chains of negativity, aren't they? Thank you.
we were discussing in our group. I suppose pride was probably a theme in our group, just that either bosses who are proud and don't communicate well with their staff and bully people and have their own agendas, but also in kind of organisational contexts that everyone, groups of people have their own agendas and try even in trying to resolve problems, cause problems by actually just by groups of doctors wanting to do some things, or managers doing some things, or whatever. So you can be sort of organisational messing it up.
So also we talked about how we respond to that, and not being a further chain in the mess of the sin that's happening, and how we respond to it in a way that is resistance, but in a positive way, and how that's actually quite tricky and complex.
So not being part of either the kind of, so when you get people like groups against each other and how explaining, forming bridges and not falling into the...
Or like the discontent is so deep-rooted within the group that you find yourself being involved in the kind of discontent and not really feeding into the frenzy, instead of being the voice of reason, kind of stepping back and saying, how do we respond to this in a way that brings about change? And that's really hard.
But the equipping of that for that task, the reflection on that and the prayer to be equipped to be swimming against the tide. So I think in the work context that's so important. Where what does our Christian witness look like? Is it just an invitation to a service every now and then, or are they seeing a picture of someone who's acting differently? It's a kind of this sort of integration, isn't it, of faith in action, so that when someone does, their knowledge of your faith resonates with their impression of your behaviour.
But I think sometimes also that what you perceive to be positive behaviour, because you're trying to do the right thing, ends up in people kind of thinking, it's just the Christians, what we do, it's not part of this construct that we've created here. You know what I mean?
Right.
I think that, and in that situation, that's when it's really hard to be consistent, because you're genuinely the outsider.
Yeah. I guess choosing when to, to be outside or to make a stand. There's some of the really hard choices, aren't they? You know, where are the lines for you in your work that you're not going to cross?
Sure.
Yeah. Any other?
I work as an architect, and so much of my of what I spend time doing wouldn't be necessary if there was more sort of trust in the workplace. So the kind of process of designing a building to actually getting to a building is kind of feels like the mindset is that you have this great idea and everyone else along the way is trying to stop you from achieving it as well as you could. And so you spend ages writing hundreds of pages of specifications so people can't cut corners, or describing everything in such detail that they can't do it wrong or do it differently.
Yeah.
A lot of that could be done in a much better way if people trusted each other, or if there was a kind of collaboration in that sense.
And that's really interesting. You know, the amount of stuff that's needed, like legal documents,
Yeah.
to replace trust. It's unbelievable, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah. It's great to have these examples from other worlds that I don't know anything about.
I don't know about it's particularly so I work with a lot of chefs, so there's a lot of egos and there's a lot of kind of fragile egos that you need to kind of work with to get the best out of, and it's hard. And that's where I feel like I'm part of the problem sometimes, is trying to kind of get the best out of them, but not really replace it with the gospel, but just feed into the whole kind of cycle of ego massaging in order to get what you need to do your job the way that you want to do it, and thinking of a better way of dealing with people whose insecurities stem from their identity not being in Christ, to kind of bolster and give them a sense of a better identity and a better. But it just feels like it's too big a job and you need to get the straight to top. Not the time for the quote.
And I think, you know, when you see sort of loneliness and stuff going on, that's one of the things I've most seen, you know, the resistance to those who are ignored. You know, the way churches are places for people who can't find places otherwhere else, in other places. I was always remember there's a woman that Giles, Fiona and I know well, who's sadly no longer alive, but she was part of our church in King's Cross, in Islington, between King's Cross and Angel. She was very difficult to include, really. And on a church weekend away, and she came on the church weekend away, and I remember her saying at this we were talking about how the church can connect to the community, and she said, the thing about me is I not only like to take, I also like to receive. And it took a while for everyone, people were laughing, but it was so true, and it was so it was a wonderful thing that the church were able to have her, hold on to her, where so many of those things were broken through. And I think, sin's so seen in broken relationships, and it results in people who are so lonely. And that the city, that's a real issue, isn't it? The city, loads of people, and loads of people by themselves. So where the sanctuary can be offered by the community. I'm going to show you a clip of a film. Has anyone seen On the Waterfront by Marlon Brando? With Marlon Brando. Sorry. It's a 1955 film. It won an Oscar for Best Picture. If you don't like black and white films, then just sorry, the next few minutes. But basically, it's a scene. It's set on the New York docks. So there's a lot of corruption in the New York docks in the 50s, and one of the local priests is trying to get the members who are working on the docks to stand up against the corruption. And there's this one guy called K.O. Dugan who's going to due in court the next day to stand up against the kind of union mob that are kind of controlling everything. And he's due to be in court the next day, and you can see what happens.
Doctor, he needs a priest.
Actually, I didn't explain. This guy, K.O. Dugan, was underneath, and they deliberately dropped a whole load of cargo on him and killed him. basically. So the guy says he doesn't need a doctor, he needs a priest. And here's the priest.
I came down here to keep a promise. I gave KO my word that if he stood up to the mob, I'd stand up with him. All the way. And now KO Dugan is dead. He was one of those fellows who had the gift of standing up. This time they fixed him. Oh, they fixed him for good this time. Unless it was an accident, like Big Mac says. Some people think the crucifixion only took place on Calvary. They better wise up. Taking Joey Doyle's life to stop him from testifying is a crucifixion. Dropping a sling on K.O. Dugan because he was ready to spill his guts tomorrow, that's a crucifixion. And every time the mob puts the pressure on a good man, tries to stop him from doing his duty as a citizen, it's a crucifixion. And anybody who sits around and lets it happen, keeps silent about something he knows has happened, shares the guilt of it just as much as the Roman soldier who pierced the flesh of our Lord to see if he'll live. Come back to your church, Father! Boys, this is my church! And if you don't think Christ is down here on the waterfront, you've got another guest coming. Get off the dock, Father!
Samuel, don't do that.
Who said you on, boy?
Let him finish.
Every morning, when the hiring boss blows his whistle, Jesus stands alongside you in the shade room. He sees why some of you get picked, and some of you get passed over. He sees the family man worrying about getting the rent and getting food in the house for the wife and the kids. He sees you selling your souls to the mob for a day's pay.
The next bug that throws something deals with me. I don't care if he's twice my size.
Now, what does Christ think of the easy money boys who do none of the work and take all of the gravy? And how does he feel about the fellows who wear $150 suits and diamond rings on your union dues and your kickback money? And how does he, who spoke up without fear against every evil, feel about your silence? Tell him about that!
Just watch this.
You want to know what's wrong with our waterfront? It's the love of a lousy buck. It's making the love of a buck, the cushy job, more important than the love of man. It's forgetting that every fella down here is your brother in Christ. But remember, Christ is always with you. Christ is in the shape-up, he's in the hatch, he's in the ute, he's kneeling right here beside Dugan. And he's staying with all. If you do it to the least of mine, you do it to me. What they did to Joey and what they did to Dugan, they're doing to you. And you, all of you. And only you, with God's help, have the power to knock them out for good.
Okay, Caleb.
Amen.
All right, come on, let's go. Bring it up, let's go on.
I'd recommend the film if any of you haven't seen it. But I really love what I love about that clip is that bit, where he's like, so this is my church. Christ is everywhere, and I'm standing up. And in the film, basically, the other priests are really angry with that priest for kind of getting involved because they get all the windows of their church smashed. But actually, it's a real, that resistance against the wrongdoing is hard, it's costly. And maybe it connects to what you were saying, and maybe hopefully it can inspire us a little bit. What does that resistance look like in the spheres that we're moving in? That sort of desire for Christ to be made manifest, to be represented, to give courage to people to stand up and make a difference. Because, you know, coming back to this diagram, you know, just as sin it is impacting on this sort of radical way in both levels, of course, you know, conversely the gospel. And both, you know, the impact of that on individuals, I talked about when that impacted me personally, but it's also, I think, having this wider vision for how the gospel can influence society. You know, that it's not just an individual one-on-one, but actually how it can really influence the structures of society, shape them in ways that are more just, in ways that are going to lead to, you know, human flourishing, and to renewal of communities, renewal of whole areas. I think the church has got an amazing track record at times of doing that. And I think at the moment, you know, I think it's a fantastic, someone like Justin Welby, the job that he's able to do to stand up around, say, food poverty, which he's done a huge amount on. And it's saying, you know, actually the kingdom of God is not just a one-on-one route to sort of personal salvation. Of course it is that, but it more widely is a kingdom of changed priorities, a kingdom that challenges the way things are. You know, what we spoke about, Alexandra spoke this morning about, you know, living out the hope within the broken. Actually, how can that be manifested and displayed? I just wanted to give you an example. I had a friend who's a vicar, a woman called Annie Kirk, and she, about 6 years ago, had a real vision for the churches in Westminster to set up a night shelter. And she got in contact with me in my job and said, I think this would be a really good idea. You know, we can get some churches together and we can set up a night shelter. And I was quite interested, but I was pretty sceptical. And the first meeting, we had 4 churches there gathering. And we were there, and she was so clear in her vision and her energy. And we basically agreed to start the night shelter with just 4 churches, so we could only cover just over half the week. So it was really, really learn. I was thinking, is this really going to go anywhere? Obviously, a lot of the homeless guys were out for 3 nights a week, and then they were in these churches on 4 nights a week. But of course, what happened was, then more churches got the vision, and things started to move. There's no funding for this. It was just someone's energy, someone's vision, someone's faith really kind of driving something. And what happened was, more and more churches got involved. And the photo that you can see was just a couple of weeks ago when all the volunteers from what is now the scheme, that has 13 churches involved, plus the local synagogue, coming together. And now we're providing accommodation for 8 months of the year, every night of the week. And you know, again, the sort of renewal, the faith that has been in an individual, that has been sort of transmuted into a societal project, a project that's changing the area, changing the lives of homeless people, but also so many others. Yeah, that spark from an individual, the link between the personal and the social is so essential, so vital. And you know, this was a great testimony to that. And I've got a friend. This is a friend of mine called Hayley, who I used to work with, and she was brought up in South London, and her dad was an alcoholic, and they lived in a really, really hectic, kind of chaotic life. And often she'd just sort of get out of the house when there was a lot of domestic violence and a lot of trouble. And basically she'd she was joining the Girls' Brigade in the church hall just down the road, and that was a real sanctuary for her. And again, you know, people volunteering, making a difference, offering her that. But she herself got into drugs later on in her life, and her life really began to spiral downwards as she used more drugs. A lot of what we're talking about, things that were passed on to her that she was living out. And basically, you know, she talks about herself like, you know, she was like a, you know, a clear blank bit of paper. But then all the issues that happened to her, she sort of felt like she basically kind of got screwed up, really screwed her life up, had her life screwed up by others. And when she was about 18, she walked past that church she used to go to for the Girls' Brigade, and it closed down, the church that was there, and it had been taken over by a Pentecostal church, and she heard all this singing, and she went and just sat at the back. And what happened was that that was a moment, a step for her of becoming a Christian. You know, it was the sort of first step, that she sat there and cried a lot, and the church really nurtured her, and she became a Christian. And she talks about the reason this bit of paper, I'll never forget her talking about it, because she said basically, from that moment on, God was like unfolding me from all of the different ways that I've been screwed up. And I'm still like this bit of paper, she says, I'm being uncreased. And she goes, I'm still very, and I'm sure I'm like this, and we're probably all like this, creased in all kinds of different ways. But she now goes into schools to do drug education. And I guess the reason for sharing her story is she said that I've realised that these creases that I've got are actually the channels for God's grace. I'm not a flat bit of paper anymore, but it's in my weaknesses, in the things I've been through, that God's strength was really seen. Because she can speak with a conviction and a story that others haven't got because of what she's been through. And I think what I love about it is that, as well as a personal knowledge of Christ, you know, it's not just given her a ticket to heaven or a personal relationship with God, but she's actually shaping the area. She said, you know, when she became a Christian, she said she's from Mitcham in South London, and she said she's a real Mitcham girl. She was going, I thought when I become a Christian, like, God, you're going to send me to Malawi or Mozambique, and he said, no, Mitcham. And you know, it's wonderful because she is part of this thing called Love Mitcham, having a massive impact on society. You know, and you know, she's changing. So individual faith, just like Annie, that vicar whose individual faith took it into social activism through the night shower. You know, Hayley's someone whose personal knowledge of Christ has had such an impact. And I think that sort of that connection, I guess, just as we begin to sort of close, I so believe in this interplay. This diagram was nicked from a book, a World Vision book, and it's called The Inseparability of the Personal and the Social. And it's so true, you know, we're individuals here you're making up a collective group of St Barnabas, Dalstons, as a community. And you're in a community of Dalstons within Hackney, Hackney's within London. And the role that each of us play, and that's within the church, but then of course you're all in individual neighbourhoods, flats, streets, jobs, where you can have an influence. You know, your knowledge of Christ, your belief can be expressed, can be put into action in ways that make a difference. I've got far too much here, so I'm just going to fast forward because I just want to show you one more clip just as we end, because I think one of the person that really embodies this connection between a personal faith and an outward action, probably the person that inspires me most is Martin Luther King. You know, obviously very well known and famous, but it's interesting because like my kids at their primary school do Martin Luther King, and my son came out a whole week of looking at him, and not once did they mention he was a Baptist minister. You know, and this kind of secularization of him, you know, as a civil rights activist, rather than as a Baptist preacher and a minister, is a real issue. One of the things I'm most interested in is, rather than the big speeches, we are going to watch one of his speeches, but is actually the fears that he went through, the struggle with fear that he went through on a daily basis, because the challenge of integrating his faith, of taking the Christian faith in a way that was going to challenge the status quo around segregation and racism, was obviously hugely costly to him. It ended up costing him his life. But as soon as those protests started, he was receiving death threats, you know, on a daily basis. And if you read his books, there's a brilliant book called Strength to Love, and it just sums this up. You know, the strength to resist, the strength to stand up was an immense challenge for him. He said, we must constantly build dikes of courage to hold back the flood of fear that can engulf us. And I'm just going to play this speech that he did at the end, just as we close, because I hope it can sort of be an inspiration, perhaps, for us. We're all in very different situations, but what does this mean, perhaps, for the situation that we're in?
All we say to America is be true to what you said on paper. If I lived in China or even Russia or any totalitarian country, maybe I could understand some of these illegal injunctions. Maybe I could understand the denial of certain basic First Amendment privileges because they haven't committed themselves to that over there. But somewhere I read of the freedom of assembly. Somewhere I read of the freedom of speech. Somewhere I read of the freedom of press. Somewhere I read that the greatness of America is the right to protest far right. And so just as I say we aren't going to let any dogs or water hoses turn us around, we aren't going to let any injunction turn us around. Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead. But it really doesn't matter with me now, because I've been to the mountaintop. I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over. And I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you. But I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
So that was the night before Martin Luther King was shot dead. So there's time's gone. I think just like with someone like him, with some of these situations that we've talked about, there's a danger, you know, to think like that's so different. That time there, that was a particular time. But I think this idea of resistance and renewal, this idea that within the spheres that you live in and work in, what are the ways that we can be standing against the way of the world? You know, the tendencies that take place both in individuals and in institutions and in culture to be selfish, to be just self-serving. How can we be in resistance to those things as individuals and as a church? And also that renewal, and especially coming back to what Alexandra shared this morning, you know, actually taking time to be renewed personally, taking that space for sanctuary ourselves, so that we can be effective for change in the world, and bringers of hope, people whose lives have a connection to the faith to which we celebrate, we sing of. So we're just let's just close our eyes just very briefly, and I'll just say a prayer as we close. Lord God, I thank you that you are a God of hope, and that hope has penetrated our lives. That through challenges and difficulties, we can cling to you. And I pray for St. Barnabas that as a church and as individuals here, we can be those who are in resistance to the sin, to the difficulties of the world, and that we can make a contribution to making a difference. Give us vision for where that might be, for what it might be. And I pray that each of us can find sanctuary, that we can be a sharer of hope in you and in what you're going to do in our lives. I ask this in your name. Amen.